Sicilian or Italian?
It's pronounced Disillow, actually.
Disillow. So it's not really Italian.
Hey, you know, it's Italian, but it's been here for a while, you know.
All right, I think we've had a little bit of a slowdown in people joining, so maybe we can get started. I'm actually going to move my camera a little bit so I'm not looking.
David is visiting.
I'm the only person in the room. I might as well take full advantage of the camera and not be looking completely in the opposite direction.
The RPC TAC meeting of July 28th. Good morning, folks.
Morning.
David, would you be kind enough to give us the introductions?
Sure. I'm going to go through the list as I see it on the screen here. We have Chris Cross from Newington.
Yes.
Yeah. Richard McDermott from Hampton Falls.
Good morning.
Eric Eby from Portsmouth.
Good morning.
Jennifer Hale from Hampton.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mark Connors from Stratum.
Good morning.
Morning. Peter Coffin from Kingston.
Morning.
Rad Nichols from Coast.
Morning.
People are all flipping around now on me. And Ricky Disillow from DES.
Good morning.
Morning. We also have Susan Connors from Stratum on the call as well, or I guess meeting as well. And then I'm Dave Walker from RPC. Scott was here, but he may be having connection issues. I'm not sure. So.
Hey, Dave, he had connection issues at the Coast Board meeting yesterday. I think it's where he is.
Yeah, I think so too. He was only going to be able to be here for part of the meeting anyhow, so
Yeah.
He does not have a fully active role in the items that we're discussing, so it's okay. We'll allow it this time.
His
Only
cruise
this- only this time.
Yeah, only this time. We'll make him do the full meeting next time.
Could I have a motion to accept the minutes for 6/23?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
That's Peter.
Got it.
Go ahead.
Do we have a second on that?
Yes.
Oh,
I'll second.
I thought I heard a second. Jennifer just second.
Yep. All right, so I'll go through the list of folks that I have here and get a vote on that since we need to do the roll call vote. So Eric Eby.
Yes.
Yes. Mark Connors.
Yes.
All right, Peter Coffin.
Yes.
All right, Chris Cross.
Yes.
Rad Nichols.
Yes.
Richard McDermott.
Speaking.
Yeah. You got a yes on the yes
Yeah.
on the minutes. All right, great. Jennifer Hale.
Yes.
All right, and then Ricky Disillow.
Abstain.
All right.
Did you get Susan Connors?
Well, it's either Mark or Susan are the voting for the for Stratum, because it's one vote per town or
Yeah,
community,
okay.
I guess.
All right.
So
All right, next on the agenda is the Nhdes Clean Diesel Grant Program with Ricky Disillow.
All right, let me just get everything set up real fast.
do you need to be able to? Are you going to run a PowerPoint, Ricky? I didn't even
Yeah,
ask
if you wouldn't mind letting me share screen, that'd probably be easiest. Oh, there we go. Does everyone see that? Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, so hi, I'm Ricky Disillow from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I'm here to talk about the Clean Diesel program for our 2022 request for proposals. I'll just say up top, all of the stuff I'm about to say is fully fleshed out in our program guide and our request for proposals. Everything can be found on the website and the link is there. I can send this to Dave to disseminate if you'd like. So let's talk about this program. So this is a reimbursement program with an anticipated funding pool of $1.4 million. The idea is to reduce diesel emissions. Some of the major ways people accomplish this is by replacing their older vehicles or replacing their vehicles with newer technology or upgrading those vehicles, as well as standalone engines, non-vehicle equipment, anything that runs on diesel. You can also look at installing idle reduction technology as well. So, like I said, this can go for pretty much anything you could think of that runs on diesel, including like a marine vessel, a locomotive, a wheeled loader, a bulldozer, a bus, and it's open to most fleets, public, private, towns, cities, school districts, businesses, nonprofits. The program opened earlier this month, and it is the first round of proposals is due on September 9th. If we still have funds left over after that, we'll look at the proposals that come in after that and kind of make 11/1 the deadline for that round. And I'll just kind of talk about what this program can do and what it's about. So the purpose of the program is to improve New Hampshire's air quality, both for human health and for the environment, by reducing diesel emissions of NOx, particulate matter, and CO2. Exposure to diesel emissions can contribute to health problems, such as asthma, lung cancer, and other cardiac and respiratory diseases, and can cause premature death. So this funding comes primarily from the federal level. The Environmental Protection Agency has provided annual funding through the Diesel Emission Reduction Act. New Hampshire then matches those DERA funds with Volkswagen Beneficiary Trust funds. And by matching that, we actually unlock bonus federal funds. All of that, we then added together with some of the leftover funds from last year, which gives us that $1.4 million. So there's two major categories of projects. There's installing a stationary plug-in for idle reduction. So this could be electrifying a truck stop so trucks don't have to idle overnight. It could be plug-in power for marine vessels so it doesn't have to idle in port. And it could be, you could do this for a locomotive as well, so it doesn't need to be idling while being maintained. More popular are vehicle engine and equipment upgrades. Oftentimes this takes the form of replacing a vehicle. You can replace an older diesel vehicle of 2009 or older with a newer diesel vehicle. Or you can replace any diesel with a low NOx engine like a propane engine, a compressed natural gas engine, or an electric version. It'll also let you replace engines in the marine vessel or rebuild a locomotive, or if you have a truck that's in good shape but the engine needs to be replaced, you can just take the engine out and repower that, stuff like that. So a couple of example projects, and sorry if I sound kind of breathy, I'm a little stuffy this morning. A couple of example projects just to kind of give you an idea of what this program has done in the past and sort of what proposals we've seen and from other states, but a lot of these are things we've actually funded. Replacing school buses with electric school buses. We haven't funded one of these yet, but we have seen a few different proposals like this throughout the country. Replacing an old diesel plow truck with a new diesel plow truck. This is a very popular option, especially here in New Hampshire. And we all can attest that those plow trucks take a beating. And so if you have one from 2009 or older than that, consider replacing that with a newer one. An old diesel wheeled loader and other sort of construction adjacent equipment. Replacing a diesel refuse truck with a compressed natural gas refuse truck, or even an old diesel drayage truck with a new diesel drayage truck. We've also seen fishing boats being repowered, rebuilding a locomotive so that it's representing a more clean emissions setup. Installing electric parking spaces at a truck stop. Like I said, that can help the trucks. So truckers, need to take these mandatory breaks where they usually just sit in the truck, sleep in the truck, and they spend the night there. And they often keep the truck running so they can use their air conditioner or their, use their electronics or whatever they have in there. But this can let them just plug in and use power from the grid instead. And this is one I wanted to bring up. We've actually had a few questions coming up with this one. If you have like a piece of diesel powered equipment that mostly stays in the same place, replacing that with something that plugs directly into the grid, like a freight crane or a trash compactor or something. So just some things to keep in mind, I want to put this slide up before we get any further. If you're talking about an on-road diesel vehicle, like a bus or a truck, it has to be class 5 or higher. So this won't work for like that sort of personal level vehicle that you have, like a pickup truck that runs on diesel. But for something larger than that, like a box truck or almost any sort of school bus, even the smaller school buses will actually count. It has to be class 5 or higher, so larger diesel vehicles. This only applies for on-road things. So if you have like an off-road diesel, like a small Bobcat or something like that, that's not going to be restricted. And again, for a diesel to diesel swap, if you want to just stay with diesel for now, it has to be from engine model year 2009 or older. But if you're ready to try an electric or a low NOx propane or CNG, there's no age restriction. The big restriction on what could be replaced or upgraded is how much it gets used. So each different type of unit, whether it's a truck or a boat or a water pump, they have a certain hour per year or miles per year they have to reach in order to qualify for this program. All of that's online, and if you have any questions, you can always ask me. And another big federal requirement here is that if you replace a diesel unit, it must be scrapped, permanently disabled after you get the new one. So this can't expand your fleet. You can't add a truck with this. This could just replace something that is ready for replacement. The funding percentages are based on, again, what sort of thing you're doing. We'll get into that in a second. The funds are reimbursement, so it has to wait until the project is completed. And the project needs to be completed by the end of next September 30th, 2023. However, the project can't be something that you've already started. I can't reimburse a project that if you replaced a truck last year or even right now, it wouldn't work. You have to wait until after approval to start the project. All right, so here's just like some projects. This isn't all of them. If yours isn't on here, I'm happy to find you the details. Again, it's all on our website. For drayage trucks, it is a 50-50 split. The grant can fund half of the cost of the new drayage truck. For a diesel swap, like an old plow truck for a new plow truck, the grant can fund up to 25% of the cost of the truck. If you're going to switch for a propane or natural gas, it would fund 35%. And if you're going for electric, it will fund 45% inclusive of the cost of the charger. If you're just doing the engine and not the whole vehicle, so like a fishing boat, or again, if you just want to repower an old truck or bus, that's actually 40% for diesel. And for instance, if you wanted to do the electrified parking space at a truck stop, it's 30% of the cost of that would come from the grants. Here's just some of the scoring criteria we're going to use to evaluate. This is a competitive selection, it's not a lottery. Anything that gets in on time and is eligible will be considered for selection, and through this scoring process, we'll kind of determine which projects on the list will be funded and in which order if there is competition for how much funds we have. The big thing I want to point out on this slide is this 45 points, the very first criterion is for cost effectiveness of emissions reductions. So that's what we're looking for as the largest determining factor in whether or not this project is going to be funded, is what is the worth of funds towards reduction of emissions. This is important because if you have a very small project, you might be thinking, well, it's not going to reduce as many emissions, will never be picked, but a smaller project may cost proportionately less, and so that may balance out. Similarly, if it's a larger project, you might think, well, this is so expensive, it'll never be picked, but it may, in fact, because it will have competitive emission reductions, it may, in fact, balance that out. We're also offering bonus points if the applicant is a government entity, and bonus points if replacing with an alternative fuel like electric, natural gas, or propane, or even plug-in hybrids is part of the option. All right, here's the schedule. Like I said, the program opened earlier this month. We have a webinar on August 9th at 10 a.m. where I'll kind of go over this program in a little bit more detail, and we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. Application period closes for round 1 on September 9th at 4 p.m. If we don't select enough projects to spend all $1.4 million, projects that are submitted after that, but before November 1st will be considered. And then the November 1st to January 1st will be round 3 if there's still funds left over. Like I said, the projects need to be completed by September 30th, 2023. That's a federal requirement. They may offer an extension to New Hampshire, but I cannot guarantee that. In the past, they've been pretty amenable to offering extensions, especially when things like supply chain and COVID slowed down a lot of projects. Again, I just can't guarantee it because I'm not holding that paper yet, but fingers crossed. All right, so you might be interested in this project, but you're worried because it seems difficult in a lot of things. We're here to help. We have the Granite State Clean Cities Coalition. You may know my colleague, Jessica Wilcox. She couldn't be on the call with me today, but she can offer project development, fleet analysis, help. She also has alternative fuel resources. So if you're thinking about switching to an electric or a propane or a natural gas unit, but you're just not sure like what's out there, like, you know, here's my fleet. Can any of these be traded in for an electric? Do they exist yet? I don't know what's out there. She can help with that. She can also help with finding that information about how to do this the right way. What are some pitfalls you want to avoid? What are some advantages you'll get to benefit from, stuff like that. And she also runs workshops, webinars, meetings, and live demos. So if you ever wanted to like actually get behind the wheel of an electric street sweeper, or, you know, check out a compressed natural gas refuse truck, she may have the opportunity for you. And both her and I at New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, we're happy to help with technical support. If you're having trouble figuring out how to use the web resources, if you can't get on the if the proposal form's not working, if you're not sure what this thing in the question means, ask me. I'm happy to help clarify. If you give me enough time ahead of time, so it can't be the day of the project being due, but if you ask me, hey, I have this idea for a project, would this qualify? I can help you determine eligibility. I can't guarantee anything, of course, but I can at least say, you know, you'd have to upgrade this or you'd have to replace this or whatever. I can help you kind of navigate the preliminaries. And we have the past projects that we can talk about. If you're trying to find an idea or if you're not sure if one of these things are going to work, we can look at what we've done in the past and sort of help you with that. So that's my time. I have my contact information here, Jessica's contact information here, the link to the webpage with all of this information. If you just Google New Hampshire DERA or clean diesel, it'll come up, I'm sure, but that is the link. And I also have a link to our webinar, which I said is on August 9th at 10 a.m. You can remember that as 8, 9, 10. And that's when we'll have another chance to talk. So if you go away from this meeting and you come up with some questions later after looking at the forms, that could be a good chance to get face-to-face or online face-to-face. Or even just hear out other people's questions in case you were wondering about something. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. And again, my contact information is there for later.
Any questions out there?
I think, Ricky, I think one of the challenges we would have is we can't go out and contract for a bus right now that would be delivered within that time frame. And it would be even worse probably if we were talking about electric versus diesel. So that's one of the challenges. And we don't have any buses left in our fleet that would be 2009 or later. So
yeah, I hear you. Like I said, that date is the federal date for September 30th of next year, and we can request extensions. And like I said, they've been pretty welcoming to extensions in the past. I think if, for instance, if a project was approved and, you know, as soon as the project's approved and it can technically begin, you know, the applicant goes out and gets the bid from the bus manufacturer, and the bus manufacturer says it won't be there until March of 2024. We would then request an approval from EPA for an extension. And I have a feeling, this is just me believing something, that we would not be the only state doing that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like EPA would be getting hit with a few different requests for that. And that might also, you know, confirm to them that they should extend it. But
Yeah, I have to assume that's the same for a lot of pieces of equipment too, or custom pieces of equipment.
I see Chris Cross has his hand up.
Yes, thanks, Dave. A similar question that Rad kind of answered is with delays on deliveries, if it's under contract but delayed. You've talked about an exception there. So it's also the second question I had to do with are things like town fire engines and equipment available?
so yeah, and I'll just double down on the extension bit for a moment. We've had in the last year, I want to say 5 different projects ask for extensions, all of them approved. So for whatever that's worth, you know, like this is so far been happening. Yes, so a fire engine that runs on diesel could be replaced. You know, it's up to the applicant to figure out who's going to supply that fire engine. And the biggest factor I would foresee in verifying a fire engine eligibility would be how much it gets used in a year. Just to peek into my personal life, I actually live across the street from a fire station, so I know how often those things are moving. But it's still like a certain number of miles per year need to be reached. I think for a vehicle like that, which is on the road, I want to say, and I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this, we'll have to check the RFP. I want to say it's 7,000 miles a year. And so if the fire engine, you know, reaches that threshold, then it would be eligible, potentially, depending on, you know, the age of the thing and everything else about it. But yes, fire engines are very much a possible project.
I thought of that because they are projected to last 25 to 30 years in at least the town budgets. The difficulty there is most of those require a town vote to fund something like that, and you don't see those until March.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that would be difficult, but yeah, thank you for the question. We actually have a fire engine project that we did. We did replace a town's fire engine in Lyndesborough, I want to say, yeah.
So I guess I have a question. So this deadline of September 30th next year, is that just for this round, or is the program getting sunsetted, kind of closed out?
Oh, I see what you mean. The deadline for September 30th is for this year of funding. EPA has funded this program for many years in the past. I expect they'll do it again next year, in which case it would be another deadline, probably a year or two out from when it opens again.
So if Newington, say, wanted to look at a new fire engine, they could start talking about it now, and likely there would be funding available next year to maybe in this program that they might be able to apply for, to sort of supplement an approval already from the, you know, from town meeting kind of thing.
Yeah, they could apply for some hypothetical 2023 DERA. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then the other piece I was thinking is, I didn't know if Rad, for your maintenance facility, if you could potentially use DERA funds to electrify your maintenance bays, that kind of thing, you know, so you don't have to, you know, idle your buses. And maybe I'm sure you've already thought of that, but.
Yeah, we're going through that process. Yes.
Okay. All right. Excellent.
thank you, Dave, for the addition on the town vote, because that's what it probably go a long ways if there's to moving up replacement, if there was it could be advertised that if you're eligible, if it's approved and eligible, the town would save 20%, something like that.
25%, yeah.
If that would be a significant incentive for the voters to move that up.
Yeah,
Thank
if
you.
it's eligible, yeah, that is sort of what I like about this program on a personal level. It gives towns and businesses a chance to save some funds on these replacements. Well, reimburse those funds rather.
It seems like something a community could start working on now and figure out if your fire engine that you need to have replaced is eligible. And then you go to the voters and then you go for the next round of DERA funds, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Planning
I was
ahead.
thinking.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking for Newington. I think we have a $1.2 million extended ladder truck that is coming up, and even portion of that, if it could be done electric in the future, might get the fire department thinking about that in our proposals. Thank you.
And for school buses, is that eligible for diesel to diesel, or does it have to be diesel to electric?
In order for it to be eligible for diesel, it needs to be a 2009 or older diesel school bus.
Okay.
If it's a school bus that is newer than 2009, it has to be replaced with either a low NOx propane, low NOx natural gas, or an electric.
Okay. Are most of the grants you've given, are they for like municipal trucks or more towards school buses?
We've had a few large school bus projects that are actually still in the works because they're so large. We've also had quite a few municipal trucks. They're both pretty popular, honestly. If that didn't answer your question, on the website is a list of all of the projects we funded since 2015, I believe. So you can kind of just take a look at what gets funded, where it's been funded, how much it ended up being funded for.
Great.
Any other questions for Ricky? Going once, going twice. Take it away, David.
All right. Well, thank you, Ricky. Appreciate you coming in and talking about this program today.
Yes, thank you for your time, everybody.
And Ricky, you're going to send that over to David so the population here can get copies?
Yes, I'll send that right now, actually.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Rick.
Okay. Yeah, after the meeting, I'll send out the presentations and that sort of stuff. Okay, I am going to share my.
Selection of projects for estimate development.
All right.
Mr. Walker.
Yes, so I am going to share screen.
We've got two of them, David, large and small.
Which are you seeing, the presenter view or the full view now?
It's the large and the small.
The presenter.
How's that?
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to get into now the project cessation and selection process that we've been talking about for the last several months. We're at the point where all the projects have come in and they've been scored, and we need to move on to set up a short list for consultants to develop estimates for. So just sort of giving a rough overview of the timeline here. I'm going to go through a little bit of the background kind of stuff first, but I'm going to try to skip through that pretty quickly so that we can talk more specifically about the projects that we're considering. So we have to have our candidate projects to do DOT by November 11th of this year, which means that we need to get them to our consultants rather soon so that they can have some time to develop those estimates and then bring them back for us to consider and sort of finalize our choices. And then DOT will review those projects over the winter, and then we have to have our final prioritized list for the 10-year plan to DOT by the end of March next year. So this is sort of the overview of the process that we started earlier this spring. We're kind of in the middle of it right now. The hope is that we'll come out of this meeting today with a short list to send to the engineers, and they'll have basically 2.5 months-ish to kind of take a look at those and develop cost estimates for as many as we can afford. And then we'll bring it back to the TAC at the October meeting for a recommendation, and the MPO policy meeting in November to get final approval. So just some reminders on the guidance from DOT. What they've been doing is adding their construction phase of projects to the last 2 years of the 10-year plan. Engineering may be put somewhere ahead of that, but the construction has been largely in the last 2 years, in which this case, these projects would be being added to, I want to say 2032 and 33, or 33 and 34, something like that. So out a bit. Our target funding remains at just under $6.7 million for the region. There has been some discussion of an increase in that allocation, but there is nothing that has been sort of decided at this point. So we're still working under the assumption that we're dealing with about $6.7 million. We also must include inflation at 2.8% per year and 10% indirect costs, which on the whole, when you're inflating out 10 years, that eats up about 30 to 35% of the funding in inflation right there. So once we do have estimates, we'll inflate them out and come out with a fiscally constrained recommendation. We have our common set of project selection criteria that we talked about at the last meeting. In the meeting before that, we use those to score these projects. We have to, and this year, this is new, the projects must go through an engineering and cost review prior to being reviewed by DOT. But we can still submit projects to them, to DOT, up to our budget target of that $6.7 million plus 2, so that we have some options. And they've again committed this round that once we've made a final recommendation of our priorities, those will be added to the 10-year plan as presented, but they must still go through the GASA process. So there's always an opportunity at that point for politics to take over and projects get moved or changed or removed, that kind of thing. So just things to keep in mind. So this round, we had 31 new projects added. 6 of those came directly from communities. We had 5 projects in Raymond, of which 2 were basically resubmittals of existing projects. So really there were just 3 new projects in Raymond. And then there's a new project in Stratum. And then I also added the 25 locations identified in the Seacoast Transportation Corridor vulnerability assessment that we completed earlier this spring. We also had a project in Rye that was edited to change the scope a bit in Rye. So some new changes, added quite a few projects, mostly my own doing. So that brings us up to 169 projects that we have in our long-range plan. 50 of those roughly are in the 10-year plan and the TIP already. So they're already somewhere in the queue, which is, that's a pretty good number. That's just a little under 1/3 of our projects are somewhere in the queue. Another 20 or so aren't really feasible at this time. Either they're not needed or we don't have enough information about sort of the scope or the need for the project to really move it forward. And that leaves us with 99 projects that are potentially eligible for the 10-year plan. I broke those down into the 3 classifications: local, regional, and interregional. We had 40 local projects, 34 regional projects, and 25 interregional projects, and conducted the scoring based on the project selection criteria and the weights that we set at the last meeting, and came up with that short list of 5 top priorities from each of the classes that was classifications that was sent out to you in the packet last week. So from those 15, I'm thinking we're going to be able to manage to pay to have 6 to 8 of those evaluated by the consultants and have estimates developed. We are still in the process of finalizing our agreement with the consultants, so I don't actually know what it'll cost for each one, but that's just a guess based on the experience of other RPCs who are doing very similar things, that you know, it's in the range of $4,000 to $5,000 per estimate. And so that's sort of, I'm counting on us being able, maybe able to get 6, hopefully maybe a couple more than that, but we'll see. So once we have those numbers, we'll develop a short list to send to DOT, and go from there. Okay, so this is kind of where we're at now, developing that very short list from the 15. So what do we do in the project development and classification side of things? While people are submitting new projects, I also look at the existing projects, and I go through and do an evaluation as to whether they should be kept into the long range plan. And I do look at dropping projects if there's very little community input or interest in a project. I did not do that this round. I had gone through last iteration with a pretty heavy hand and removed a bunch of projects that were not either feasible at all or not, you know, the communities weren't interested. And so I didn't have to really do that this round. And then those projects that we don't have a defined scope or cost, they may be kept in the plan, but moved to as illustrative projects where we're not really counting them against our fiscal constraint, but they're also not really moving forward either at that point, but we still want to keep them in for whatever reason. I look at the data that we have for projects and we try to update it as best we can, and check to see if there's additional data that's available on project scopes or descriptions, looking at costs where we have them. We also look for very obviously projects that are seriously underestimated in terms of costs, and just sort of flag those, recognizing that they're really underestimated. Don't have to do as thorough a job about that right now, given that we will have consultants on board to check the estimates on those projects that are the priorities to move forward. So wasn't as thorough about this time. And then I go through and I classify projects as local, regional, or interregional. And so really that was the new projects this time that needed that, although there were a couple that I shifted from one category to another as it seemed to make better sense. And this again is done to just help us balance those sort of competing needs and priorities. The needs at the local level are different than they are at the regional level or at the major highway system level. And we want to make sure we're trying to balance those and give opportunities for all of those different types of projects to get funded in the 10-year plan. And then the final thing we look at is the project a good fit for the 10-year plan, or is there a program that it is much more likely to get funded in or much more likely to be funded faster through? So that's the kind of things that we look at. And here's just the 3 scales as we've talked about before, looking at the local, regional, and interregional. I don't need to go through all this again. We've talked about that several times, but it's just kind of the different focus areas. In terms of project selection, we look at just a couple, sort of a 4-step process here. We look at, is the project feasible? You know, does it address a clearly defined transportation need? Is it a reasonable approach? And is it likely to get permitted for construction and from the resource agencies? And we also look at, you know, support for a project. Is the, you know, the community behind the project? And, you know, in some cases, are there matching funds available? That's not so much important as part of the 10-year plan process, but it is helpful to know those kinds of things. You know, does the project conform to regulations and plans for affected areas, or is it proposing something that is wildly different than what the regulations might allow? Those are the kinds of things we look at. And we look to make sure the project is eligible for federal funding programs. And with the explosion in different types of funding available under the new bipartisan infrastructure law, you know, that is somewhat of a guess at this point. There may be things that were in the past not eligible or may not be eligible now because of the expanded numbers of programs that are available to do things like address municipal bridges or culverts and that kind of thing. So we just have to keep things wide open at this point to see what might be out there. And then the 4th and final step in that project selection piece is applying the project selection criteria. So, and here are the criteria with the weights that we set at the last meeting. So there are 8 categories: economic development, accessibility and equity, mobility, natural hazard resiliency, network significance, safety, state of repair, and local and regional support. And so these are how we weighted them at the last meeting, and that was the outcome. So for each category under each of the different classifications for local, regional, and interregional, there are slightly different percentages applied for each project. So, all right, that's sort of the background piece of this. Are there any questions at this point? All right, not seeing any hands and nobody speaking up, so I'm going to just keep plowing forward. All right, so in the project selection process, there are no cost estimates included at this point. We're going to use our consultants to get that information. So we're looking at these projects based on just the merits of the projects themselves and not the cost at this point. So this project selection criteria, remember that score and the ranking serves as a starting point and gives us sort of a reasonable number of priorities to consider and review at the TAC level. We'll be selecting the projects today just to move forward for scope and cost estimates. This is not our final selection for the 10-year plan, as I've said I think a couple times now. And again, I expect that we might be able to get 6 or 8 from the consultants. And so we can either do this one of 2 ways. We can either accomplish this by selecting 6 to 8 priority projects, or by ranking all 15 that we have. And I'll kind of leave that up to the TAC and then to think about over the next few minutes while I'm talking about the individual projects and how we might want to approach coming up with that organized list. So, and those projects that aren't selected, they don't just go away. They'll still be included in the long-range transportation plan, and we'll be considering them for future 10-year plan cycles. Some of the projects that are in our short list have been in this list in the past. And will probably continue to be in the list in the future. And so, these projects stick around. They're not just going to go away. The benefits of being included in the long range plan is you do sometimes get points for scores on some of those competitive grant funds, such as TAP or CMAQ, or even some of the newer nationally competitive programs such as the build grants or raise grants or some of the other ones, where if it's included in long range planning and regional planning plans, you can get some bonus points occasionally for that. So I think it's beneficial to keep these projects around, even if we can't fund them immediately. And we also will be integrating as we continue to move forward, we're integrating a number of regional analyses that help us identify project ideas. And some of these may overlap with existing projects and some of them may be new. So we look at our congestion management process. What are the congested areas in the region? Are there things that we can do to address bottlenecks and that kind of thing? We look at regional safety issues, looking at those locations that maybe are eligible for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or for maybe the Safe Streets and Roads for All program potentially in the future, those kind of things. We have the level of traffic stress study that Scott worked on a couple of years ago that looked at which of our roadway links are the most stressful for bicycle riders and which are the most critical for creating low stress routes. And so those are project ideas that can potentially be included in here, trying to reduce the level of traffic stress on some of those critical links. And then we also have a sidewalk analysis that we did that was similar to the level of traffic stress study that looked at the criticality of particular links for sidewalk connections based on the populations that are around them. So those are all things that get thrown into the mix here and considered and looked at. So, I've talked about these a little bit, but on the sheets that I'm going to show next, there's some information shown. There's columns related to the CMP, the crash data, the LT level traffic stress study, the sidewalk analysis, and as well as the Seacoast Transportation Corridor Vulnerability Assessment is mentioned a lot in the details. So just to try to orient people that when we're talking about these things, these are the kinds of issues and data that we're talking about. So crash data, for instance, we're only using through 2019 at this point. We have work updates are in the works for 2020 and 21, but we don't have that all included yet. And that data was used to identify locations of fatal and serious injury crashes. So we can match that up with project locations. Level traffic study, level of traffic stress study. We identified high stress links and matching those up with project locations. Sidewalk analysis looked at, all the locations of populations that were likely to be more dependent on pedestrian infrastructure. So looking at if a project is included, if a project is in an area where it was likely to be more dependent on pedestrian infrastructure, that's noted. And then also the Seacoast Transportation Corridor Vulnerability Assessment, where we identified locations susceptible to flooding from sea level rise. And so we identified, and there are a number of projects that were included from that. And so it's mentioned a lot in the discussions about those. So just to go over that. So I'm going to go through now each of the 15 projects on the short list and just give a little summary of the project and then sort of a pluses and minuses of including that in our list of projects to go to the consultants. Going through them in rank order, starting with the local projects, the Maplewood Avenue culvert replacement in Portsmouth. This was the top ranked project in the local category. It is addressing a red list bridge, or it's actually a red list culvert that's susceptible to impacts from sea level rise. It is an area that is considered congested as part of the congestion management process. It's not a high crash location. As I said, it is an area that's vulnerable to sea level rise. And it was considered a critical link in the level traffic stress study, but was a low priority in the sidewalk analysis in terms of how dependent that area is on pedestrian facilities. The advantage of this is that it is probably a big project too. So it would be, from the perspective of the 10-year plan, it's probably a good size project. I don't have a current cost estimate on it. But an opportunity might be to fund it elsewhere through, say, the municipal bridge program, because it is a city-owned bridge, or culvert, I should say. It may be faster to get it through that municipal bridge program, especially with the additional resources that are put out there in the bipartisan infrastructure law. But that's still, none of these should be disqualifiers or qualifiers for us making a choice. It's more of a just to keep the information out there. Is this, if it doesn't get chosen as one of our priorities, there's another pathway potentially for a project to go forward. The second ranked project is actually the second, third, and fourth ranked project is 3 locations that we are sort of considering as one location. When we did the Seacoast Transportation Corridor Vulnerability Assessment, these 3 spots were considered together because they all need to be addressed together to ensure continued access to Newcastle Island. If you just address one or 2 of them, then you don't really fix the problem. So these are 3 locations that are essentially all low-lying areas that are susceptible to sea level rise. And that if you don't address them eventually, they will cut off the southern access to Newcastle Island, except for the one spot at Neal's Pit Lane, which it would cut access to the island in half due to the location of where that area of low, where 1B is very low in that area. And if it gets flooded, you can't get from one side of the island to the other. So there's 3 spots, 1 in Newcastle, 2 are in Rye, 1 near Sanders Point, near the golf course is a low-lying stretch of land, and then also near the marina, the BG's Boathouse and Marina, near the Portsmouth border is also another low-lying area with a culvert that is in poor shape. So the idea would be to probably raise the roadways in these locations and improve the drainage under the roads through new culverts. The pavement condition and the bridge condition and the culvert condition in these locations is poor for the most part. It is not a highly congested area. It's not a high crash location. It is vulnerable to sea level rise. It was not a critical link in the level traffic stress study, and it was not a high priority in the sidewalk analysis. That being said, continued access to Newcastle Island is kind of a critical issue that needs to be addressed. As a side note here, and maybe a reason to wait on these, is that the Neal's Pit Lane location is currently undergoing an engineering analysis funded through the coastal program, and is being conducted by the Rockingham County Conservation District in conjunction with the community of Newcastle. And that work may give us a better idea of what is viable in those 3 locations for improvements, as well as the cost. So it potentially may make sense to wait on this location until that analysis is complete. The other reason that might be worth a reason to wait is that none of these locations will be impacted until about 4 feet of sea level rise. So we have potentially 25 or 30 years or more, based on current assumptions, before they would start to see regular impacts from sea level rise in those locations. So we may have time to wait. And you'll see that statement. I'll be repeating that statement a few times throughout this. There are a number of locations in here that are not impacted till higher levels of sea level rise, so we might have the opportunity to wait on those. The next project, this is actually the 5th ranked project in the local category, or 3rd, depending on how you want to consider those Newcastle and Rye projects that I just talked about. So this is the New Hampshire 102 intersection with Blueberry Hill and Raymond. This has been the site of several serious crashes in recent years. There's been at least 1 fatality and a couple of serious injury crashes that have occurred there. And it's basically due to a very short sight lines. If you look in the inset picture, Blueberry Hill is off to the road to the left. That sight line up over that rise is under, it's right around 300 feet, which is very short for the speed limit and the roadway that 102 is the amount of traffic that 102 carries. So again, the site of several serious crashes. The site should be eligible for HSIP due to the fact that there was a fatality there and at least 1 serious injury crash. So that may be a faster pathway to implementation than going through the 10-year plan. And given that the types of improvements that are likely to be implemented there, it may be the best choice for this project. I'm not entirely clear on that, but we could see. So pavement in this condition is actually pretty good. There's no bridges here. It is not a congested area in the congestion management process, but it is a higher crash location. In addition to the serious injury crashes and the fatal crash, there were quite a number of non-injury or low injury crashes that have occurred in that area. And again, I think it's due to the restricted sight lines here. This location is not vulnerable to sea level rise or other climate issues at this point. Wasn't identified as a critical link in the LTS study or a priority in the sidewalk analysis. But the safety issues push it up high in the ranking.
Yeah, can we move that up because there are fatalities involved?
Yeah, I mean, we can the TAC in the end of this can basically decide whatever you want. We can pick and choose the projects to put it forward to getting estimates on. So we can move it up in essence. So
the reason I'm saying it, David, is somebody getting late to work versus somebody dying. It's like apples and oranges.
Yep, I agree. Yeah. So, but that's part of the conversation we can have at the end here is okay. we want to decide which are the priorities to put forward.
Okay.
And there's no reason that we couldn't put this forward for the 10-year plan, and the town of Raymond could also put this forward for HSIP at the same time. Those proposals are due in December, so we may actually know if it could get into the HSIP program before we make recommendations for the final recommendations for the 10-year plan. So there are some opportunities there to sort of move projects forward in multiple pathways at the same time. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah, and because of that, I grouped those projects on 1B in Newcastle and Rye together. I included a couple of additional projects in the local category that wouldn't typically be included. So we get a rank 6 and 7 in this one, or 4 and 5, depending on how you want to classify. Again, those group projects in Newcastle Rye. So this is Route 121A, which is Main Street in Plastow and North Avenue. This is an intersection that has been on our long-range transportation plan for a long time. It's a project that pretty consistently scores near the top. It's got an offset intersection with another roadway that moves off to the top of the picture that's hidden under the block of text there. That creates some problems. It's actually a pretty high volume. Both North Avenue and Main Street carry roughly 10 to 12,000 cars a day. And so the intersection is relatively crowded or congested. It's not a highly congested area, so it didn't really run into like, it's not like, you don't see huge backups there, but there is usually a queue of traffic coming off of North Avenue. Is also a truck cut through route often that's used, using North Avenue and Main Street to cut around the traffic on 125. Things that have been considered there in the past, DOT actually in the 1990s proposed blowing that intersection out into a very large signalized intersection and received a lot of pushback from the community. And they were, I think, a little bit scarred from that. So they've kind of held back on moving that forward ever. But it is an area that potentially could use some traffic improvements. It's not, like I said, it's not a heavily congested area, but there are some issues there. It's not a high crash location, although there are significant numbers of crashes along Main Street in this area. This intersection in particular doesn't seem to be a problem from a crash perspective. It's not vulnerable to sea level rise. It wasn't identified as a critical link in the LTS study or the sidewalk analysis. And then sidewalk analysis is a little more moderate in terms of priority there, given that this is very close to Route 125. So there's a lot of residential areas right here, and this provides a connection from there to all the development along 125 right there in Plastow. So
One note to add to the bottom of that, David, is when we have our RPC meetings, it gets a little congested then.
yes. Yep. So the last project that we have in the local category is a new project that was added by Stratum this round. This is the New Hampshire 108 Gateway Pedestrian Improvements in Stratum. I think I wrote Route 33 on this in my table there, but it's actually on Route 108 through that main section right just to the, I guess that's east of Route 101. So this project would improve bicycle and pedestrian facilities along a very wide, high volume roadway that currently has very limited shoulders and limited sidewalk accommodations and only one crossing point, which is all the way basically to the left of the image that's on the screen. There is one crosswalk right there and none at the other two intersections. These are heavily traveled areas from a motor vehicle standpoint. But there is very little way to get across the street or down the street if you are not in a car. This is the pavement in this area is in pretty good condition. It's not, there's a little bit of congestion there, but it's not a highly congested area. There are a few crashes here and there, but it's not a high crash location. Not vulnerable to sea level rise. It was listed as a critical link in the level traffic stress study, mostly, I think, with the opportunity to connect these retail opportunities and job centers to residential areas nearby. That being said, it was a relatively low priority in the sidewalk analysis. I think for this project, there needs to be some additional details provided on the scope if it is selected for estimate development, because it's very generally listed and I think we just need to nail down sort of what's actually being proposed so that we would need to do that to get a better estimate developed. All right.
Yeah, that was the question I had, David, was that is it actually pedestrian or was it more bike lanes? Because it really isn't a pedestrian area there.
Well, I think the idea is that this is kind of the gateway to Stratum, and the idea is to sort of transform this area into more of a pedestrian-friendly area. And so there are sidewalks, very narrow sidewalks along 108 on each side, but there's a very narrow shoulder. So I think that's something that we would, if we decide that this is one to move forward, we definitely need to get some more detail on the scope before we push that.
Right, yeah, just as a side note, that green spot between 110 Grill and Market Basket right there has been raised. It's been cleared and is under development right now, so that's more and more congested.
Yeah, there's a dentistry office, I think, going in there of some sort, if my memory is right. So I saw Rad, you had your hand. Did you put that? Did you change your mind?
Yeah, no, we've had numerous requests from our riders who get dropped off and picked up at the Market Basket that would love to be able to cross safely over to the other commercial options on the other side of the street.
That's a great point. Thank you. Okay. Oh, I see Chris Cross has a raised hand.
Just a quick question, David. Is this an area where the existing sidewalks could be replaced by an off-road sidewalk that is more into the parking areas and fully separated by 6 to 10 feet so that snow being plowed and wayward vehicles that for some reason veered off the road would hit a rock or something before they would impact the bike in the sidewalk area, new sidewalk area?
I think that's a possibility. There's certainly space on the bottom side of the road there. I'm not sure what direction that is. I guess that's probably south. There's certainly a lot of space there that isn't being utilized right now, and there may be opportunity for that. I think on the and maybe even on the north side as well, there might be some opportunities to move it in through some of the internal roads as well, to just get away from traffic entirely. So yeah, I think there's probably opportunities for that.
Because that's when you have a commercial vehicle accessible area and want to transition it, if you can get those sidewalks and the bike lanes off the main roadway, if there's still room, even if it takes some of the parking area at the fringe, it makes it much more pedestrian and welcoming for expanding that kind of access, including the crosswalk at the lights. Thank you.
All right.
That's an interesting idea. Can folks hear me?
Yes, Scott.
That's an interesting idea, Chris. And I think the main thing we just need to be careful, or assuming space is available, we just need to be very careful with the turning cycles at those intersections and maybe get rid of that kind of bailout for northbound traffic there that heads in by the Burger King, is it?
Right.
That isn't signalized. Just so that you don't have cars coming in and clipping riders on the side path. But I think all of that could be worked out.
That's a great point. If that was eliminated and you just had the two signalized entrances to both sides, the crosswalks could be there, but the sidewalk and bicycle could actually veer out well into the parking area for their crossing to allow people to turn and actually pause and have some stacking distance so that you have less impact on the throughway traffic. That's a good point, Scott.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the regional scale projects. So there are only 5 in this category because I don't have any grouped together. So the first top ranked project was resiliency improvements on High Street in Hampton. High Street is actually impacted at very low levels of sea level rise, at like less than 1 foot of sea level rise. This does impact important connections to Hampton Beach and the Hampshire seacoast. On the downside, we may not be able to solve this issue with just a transportation project. It may be a bigger type of public works, but it is an important one to be considered in the mix. So this again is on High Street in Hampton, which is actually Route 27. The pavement condition in this location is poor. It is a congested area in the congestion management process. Mostly that's related to summertime tourism traffic. It is not a higher crash location. But it is extremely vulnerable to sea level rise and flooding, and was listed as a critical link in the LTS study as well. So, and given the proximity of both residential, commercial, and tourism to that area, it's a more moderate level of priority in the sidewalk analysis. So this was the top ranked project in the regional category. Second was Ocean Boulevard improvements. This is phase 2, and this is, I want to just note that in terms of how I listed Ocean Boulevard projects in the long range plan, I broke them out by phases based on what was in the Hampton Beach area Commission Transportation Master Plan that was from 2018. So things may be phased differently based on the existing Hampton 40797 project and the design work that's occurring for that. So just as a note, this particular section is the area basically between Highland Avenue and Church Street. So Highland Avenue is the inbound or eastbound leg of Route 101 where it connects to Hampton Beach, and Church Street is the westbound leg of 101 where it leaves Hampton Beach. And so Church Street is here on the sort of on the right side where it says explore the ocean world oceanarium. That's Church Street that runs out of the picture there to the top of the screen. And Highland Avenue is just to the right of the pink marker there that shows the bed on it on sort of the left side of the screen, runs underneath the edge of the grayed out box and out of the screen that way. So that's the inbound side. So this location is actually included in the design work for Hampton 40797, but that project has not progressed enough to know whether or not improvements to this section will be funded as part of the construction work for that project or not. But NHDOT is going to design the whole length and stretch of improvements along Ocean Boulevard all the way from essentially the Seabrook Hampton Bridge all the way north to I believe High Street as part of the design phase of this project, but they may not be constructing all of it during that project. So it's unclear at this point. But pavement condition in this area is relatively good at this point. It is a relatively congested area as noted in the congestion management process. Again, this is largely due to summer tourist traffic. It's a higher crash location. There are quite a few crashes that occur along this stretch of roadway. And there's interesting interactions between pedestrians and bicyclists and cars, given the parking in the middle and traffic passing through the middle sections of the road to make turns, that kind of thing. So there's some interesting traffic patterns that occur there. This area is somewhat vulnerable to sea level rise, although it's less vulnerable than High Street in terms of direct impacts to this part of Ocean Boulevard. The impacts actually occur on Church Street and Highland Avenue as opposed to right on Ocean Boulevard at this location. It was not identified as a critical link in the level traffic stress study, however, and it was not a high priority in the sidewalk analysis. There are actually pretty extensive sidewalks out in that area. Again, it's just, I think, the traffic patterns that make things a little bit awkward. And that's something hopefully that is being addressed as part of that Hampton 40797 in terms of coming up with a design that works better for everybody who's in that area. I think this is a great project. I think there may be, the reason for waiting would be to see what the Hampton 40797 design work comes up with for this section and whether or not it's going to be funded as part of that project or not in terms of construction.
One note there, I think the VHB concept from the beach master plan actually reduced bicycle safety through this section. The predominant design consideration seemed to be expanding parking, and the proposal was to go from angle-in parking to perpendicular parking, which ended up losing shoulder width on both sides. So hopefully that will be addressed in 40797, taking a more detailed look at it beyond what was done at the conceptual design stage.
Yeah, and they are, and I haven't seen, we participated in I know Jennifer was at the workshop that I was at a month or two ago about this project. And I did not see any of the VHB designs from the 2018 plan included or shown at that meeting. And they are taking bike and pedestrian safety very seriously as part of the design, as an important and critical component of whether the project is meeting the purpose and need. Is it improving bike and pedestrian access and safety through that area? So. So moving on, the third ranked project in this area, in the regional category, is this reconfiguration of the Stratum Circle. So this is where routes 108 and Route 33 converge or diverge, depending on your approach. This project would reconfigure this, and there's been a couple of design options put forward to a couple of smaller roundabouts or a couple of sort of signalized intersections. That's I think still up in the air in terms of how that design might shape out. But it would definitely help reduce speeds and improve safety and replace what is really an outdated design in terms of the traffic circle. It could also improve bike pedestrian facilities and safety in this area. On the side of reasons to not put this one forward, the location is not over capacity. It doesn't have any capacity issues. Crashes that occur tend to be fairly frequent, but there tend to be also very either non-injury or very low injury crashes. They're not the serious and the fatalities that we're seeing in some other locations. So, they tend to be people merging and diverging and colliding that way. So not a lot of head-ons or T-bones, but it is a concern. There are a lot of crashes that occur at this location. It's just they tend to be the lower impact crashes. Pavement condition in this area is relatively okay. It's in fair condition in the area. It's not a super congested area in the congestion management process. It is a higher crash location. As I said, it was not necessarily vulnerable to sea level rise in this area or other climate issues. It was not identified as a high priority in the sidewalk analysis or in the level traffic stress study. So, but something that's worth considering though is getting rid of these older designed interchanges that we have. You'll see another one coming up. Priority number 4, according to the scoring, was Route 1A near Rye Harbor. This is addressing resiliency issues in and around Rye Harbor, basically from Lock Road, which is down here at the bottom of the picture, north all the way through Rye Harbor and along 1A. There are several locations where water will, with sea level rise, breach the roadway and reduce accessibility. This is an area that actually experiences some flooding now from king tides and storms. Particularly in the area here between Lock Road and Harbor Road, it tends to flood and right around Harbor Road. That being said, this area isn't expected to be impacted until on a regular basis until about 4 feet of sea level rise. So again, we have that 20 to 25 years potentially before we really need to have something in the 10-year plan. So we've got a little bit of time there. On the other hand, and another piece of this is NHDOT is working with the town of Rye to replace this culvert that's just north of Lock Road in this area with a higher capacity culvert. And that may help address some of the flooding issues, and assuming it's designed that way, but it may not address all of them. And so we can maybe wait to see the outcomes of that Lock Road culvert project to see if that improves things in that area. Again, this is an area that is definitely vulnerable to long-term sea level rise impacts and will have to be addressed eventually, but maybe something that we can wait on. Payment in this condition is fair, and so it's not in the worst condition, not in the best condition. It's not a high crash location or a very congested area. It is definitely vulnerable to sea level rise. It's a moderate priority in the sidewalk analysis, but a low, not a critical link in the level traffic stress study. The final project in the regional category, the 5th ranked one, is the Ashworth Avenue Complete Streets project. There's also an Ashworth Avenue sea level project to address resiliency issues. It's a separate project, although really can't separate them probably. So my understanding is that Ashworth Avenue, which is the southbound portion of Route 1A through Hampton Beach, it kind of runs through the center of this picture from left to right. My understanding is that is not included in the current design work of the Hampton 40797 project. So that might be an opportunity might be a good opportunity to get this included in the 10-year plan. The roadway does carry substantial motor vehicle traffic as well as bike and pedestrian traffic. Its facilities for bicycles in terms of shoulders are fairly narrow in this location. And sidewalks are relatively narrow as well, but it provides a connection between the various residences and hotels and motels in this area, as well as the large parking lot. Provides a connection between all those things, as well as a connection back to the beach here at the bottom of the picture. One of the reasons to wait on this project might be even though it's not in that 40797 project, that may influence what's needed for that segment. And so it may just be a reason to wait another round for this. It will not address sea level rise issues that will impact Ashworth Avenue up and down its entire length. But in all likelihood, there is not a roadway project that would solve those sea level rise issues along this section of Hampton and Ashworth Avenue, because that water is coming from the backside in the estuary and will be going through all those houses and buildings to get to the road. So it needs to be something, probably a bigger picture, like a seawall or something in that area. So reason to wait on it might be to address those other issues too. Pavement condition in this area is relatively poor, but it is not a super congested area in our congestion management process. There are quite a few crashes that occur along Ashworth Avenue and in that area. They tend to be relatively low speed and not high serious injury crashes, but there are quite a few crashes that are occurring. Vulnerable areas definitely vulnerable to sea level rise, not identified as a critical link in the LTS study. But was a moderate priority in the sidewalk analysis. So that's number 5 for the regional. Now we're moving into the interregional projects. These tend to be much larger projects on much larger facilities, like interstates and that kind of thing. The top ranked project, which was the top ranked project last round as well. This is the reconfiguration of the Portsmouth traffic circle. There are significant safety, capacity, and operational challenges in this area. It's an extremely outdated design with people carry a lot of speed into the traffic circle. And so there are a lot of crashes that occur there. There's a lot of congestion that occurs as people tend to get queues forming up off the Spalding Turnpike, which is sort of coming off the upper right corner of the picture. And you get queues there backed up almost onto the turnpikes at times, even onto the full turnpike at times. So that can be a problem. This was the subject of a study that occurred and was completed in 2004 by DOT. They studied the whole entirety of the Route 1 bypass. In the end, the recommendation was to just fix the bridges over the bypass out of that study, but they did include a lot of potential improvements for the traffic circle. And I think what killed that project at the time was there was a pretty substantial disagreement between DOT and the city of Portsmouth as to what the best solution was for that location. There was DOT was proposing at the time, and again, remember this is 20 years ago nearly, some flyovers and a very huge signalized intersection to replace the circle. I think the city wanted something very different from that. And so I think they just decided they were going to hold off for the time being. But again, this one keeps coming up at the top of our list as a high priority. If we don't put this forward this time, I'm definitely going to push this back to DOT to say, can we revisit the Route 1 bypass study and look at this interchange again, and see if we can't do something there. This is a pretty congested area in the CMP. Pavement condition is fair in that area. High crash location for certain, not necessarily vulnerable to sea level rise issues, not a critical link in the sidewalk analysis or the LTS study. This really is just a location for motor vehicles and not for bikes or pedestrians.
All right, David,
Yes.
when it says that one of the plans to replace a traffic circle with a roundabout, what's the difference?
So basically a roundabout would be lower speed. But in this case, this is kind of what you might consider a poorly designed roundabout in this case, because it does have the difference between a roundabout and a circle is technically in a traffic circle. A roundabout is you yield on entry and it's a low speed, like 15 miles an hour is generally what you look at a roundabout. People can carry a lot more speed just because of the large size. So people are running through this at 25, 30, 35 miles an hour in some cases, and the long stretches get in. But it is kind of this weird hybrid roundabout traffic circle. It's not, Stratum Circle is more of a circle where, sort of the traditional traffic circle is you yield when you're in it to vehicles that are entering. And you carry, in Stratum Circle, you can carry high speeds unless you're turning. In this case, so it's the design is a little different. But ideally, if you were going to replace this with a traffic circle, you would do something more like, a roundabout. You would do something what's more like at Lee Circle or Lee Roundabout now, up at Route 4 and 125, where you have a double lane roundabout, and it's very low speed. So people are going through it at 10 to 15 miles an hour, and that would reduce your crashes right there by itself. So I think that this area is complicated, where you have the I-95 off ramps, you have the bypass and the Spalding Turnpike all coming together. It may require double roundabouts or some other sort of innovative kind of design. But given that it's been 20 years since DOT looked at this, it might make sense to consider, what are some modern sort of alternatives and designs that we could do to improve the functionality of this area. So, all right, second category, second priority in this category is the 101 Brown Avenue access to Hampton Beach. Again, this is at the same location as the Ocean Boulevard project that we talked about in the regional category. So this is coming, 101 approaches Hampton Beach out of the top of the picture. Westbound, the eastbound approach comes into Hampton Beach along Highland Avenue, and the westbound egress from Hampton Beach goes out Church Avenue and connects back together. They're just inside the estuary area. This project also includes some of Brown Avenue, which is also susceptible to sea level rise issues. So this location is impacted at a fairly low level of sea level rise. It's impacted at the 1 foot sea level rise on Highland Avenue, and that expands by 4 feet of sea level rise. It's actually expanded to include parts of Church Street. So it's both ingress and egress from Hampton Beach, as well as parts of Brown Avenue. So you're losing access to that sort of alternative access way. So it has heavy impacts to all the surrounding buildings as well. So it may be something that's more than just a transportation project in this area to try to address that problem. The pavement condition in this area is relatively poor, although there are some sections that are in good condition. It is a congested area in the congestion management process, not a particularly high crash location, I think, due to the separation of directions of traffic through there. It's actually fairly low number of crashes. Vulnerable to sea level rise for certain, not a critical link in the LTS study, but a priority in the moderate priority in the sidewalk analysis. So, again, This one is one of those ones from a roadway perspective we need to address relatively quickly, but it may not be something we can address with a highway project. There's probably something, a larger seawall or something like that, that's going to need to really solve the problem in this area. But it's something we should be talking about. Third priority is Route 1 over the Sagamore Creek in Portsmouth. This is by the Rathskeller restaurant right in this area, which actually experiences pretty considerable flooding to their parking lot fairly regularly. But at this point, the roadway is not impacted directly by that. It is susceptible at about 4 feet of sea level rise. We start to see, or somewhere between 2 and 4 feet of sea level rise, we'll start to see impacts at this location on Route 1. This area, Route 1, carries 20 to 25,000 cars a day. So any closure is a significant event, and that traffic needs to be rerouted through, in some cases, roads that are not designed to carry 20 to 25,000 vehicles a day. Pavement condition in this area is relatively good. It is considered a congested area in our congestion management process. It is a relatively higher location for crashes. There are quite a few crashes occur in the area. They tend not to be, again, the serious injury or fatal crashes, but they are occurring. There's a pretty good number there. I did not have information on whether this was considered in the level of traffic stress study or not. In the sidewalk analysis, this shows up as a moderate priority, given the connection to the various retail and job opportunities in this area, as well as a couple of neighborhoods that are relatively close by. Again, reason to wait on this might be that we aren't going to see those regular impacts from sea level rise for 20 to 25 years. So we may have some time. Fourth priority was another resiliency improvement, this time on Route 286 in Seabrook. So this is the connection, the only connection sort of south of 101 to the beach is through Route 286 here in Seabrook, which actually passes into Massachusetts to the west of the picture a little bit. And it connects back to Route 1 back there in Massachusetts. This is susceptible to flooding from storm surge and sea level rise, and it's expected to be at the 4-foot level of sea level rise, although these adjacent businesses here, particularly Brown's Seafood and Marky's Lobster Pound in those areas, tend to get extensive flooding in their parking lots during king tides and storm events. This area has relatively good pavement condition at this point. It's not super congested. There's a little bit of congestion that occurs due to beach traffic. It is a higher crash location, and speeds through this area are approaching 50 miles an hour. So they tend to be sometimes higher injury crashes in that area. And so it is, I believe, eligible for HSIP, given that there was a fatality or serious injury crash in there over the last 10 years. It is vulnerable to sea level rise, as I stated. I did not have information from the LTS study as to whether this was considered a critical link or not. And it was a moderate priority for sidewalk analysis, particularly on, I think, this eastern end, which is closer to the residential areas that are along the beach, just off to the side of the picture here. But this does provide a main impact, a main primary connection to Hampton Beach and Seabrook Beach, as well as a large number of residential residences in that area. So it's critical from that standpoint. Again, we might be able to wait a bit just because the sea level rise impacts aren't anticipated for a couple of decades. And finally, the fifth priority, which is also a resiliency-based project, US Route 1 through the Hampton Seabrook estuary. This is between Hampton Falls and Hampton. This location does currently experience some flooding from king tides and storm surge on occasion. And we've seen at least partial closures of Route 1 in that area occasionally in the past. And this area does carry 20 to 25,000 vehicles a day, similar to that section in Portsmouth. It is a very regular way for people to get to the beach using this section of Route 1 to connect to 101. And so any closures require rerouting of a significant amount of traffic. And so that's something that's has to be considered. Pavement condition in this area is pretty good. There's actually a bridge, it's a bridge / culvert in this area that's in good condition as well. It is This section of Route 1 is actually not considered congested in the congestion management process. That congestion occurs just to the south in Hampton Falls, but this area is actually fairly free flow for the most part. It is not a high crash location. There are not a lot of crashes that occur in this area. There are a few, but not a lot. Not a critical link in the level of traffic stress study or in a low priority in the sidewalk analysis. Again, this is expected to be impacted somewhere between 2 and 4 feet of sea level rise. So we don't expect impacts on a regular basis for 20 to 25 years again. But given the scale of the project that's probably needed in this area in terms of like raising Route 1 or bridging this section, we probably need to be thinking well ahead for planning purposes on what's needed through here.
David,
Yes.
excuse me, what about the pond back in Hampton Falls?
Pond, oh, to the south of Hampton Falls?
Yeah,
Yeah, you know, that one didn't show up in our STCBA, that analysis as a problem until very high levels of sea level rise, like the 6 foot of sea level rise. So, but I know it does back up and flood occasionally. So that is a sort of a separate issue that would need to be addressed. Yeah.
okay.
So pulling all these together, you know, I think what I sent out to you just sort of is a list of the top projects for each of these, and didn't include necessarily some of this information that we were talking about today. But we have 5 priorities in the local area, regional priorities, and interregional priorities. So what we need to do is kind of select a subset of those to be sent to the consulting engineers for scope and cost estimate development. And really how we do that is up to you. Ideally, my ideal situation is that we'd select at least 2 projects from each category. And then pick maybe a couple of others to sort of provide backups so that we could, you know, if by chance we can get 8 projects, we would have 8 that we would have prioritized to do so. And, you know, I'm not sure exactly how to go through this, but we will need a motion and a TAC vote supporting moving projects forward for scope and cost estimate development. So I did, you know, and maybe stop my share for the moment, and I can put that back up if we need to look at different things. But I did create a survey within Zoom that we could have people fill out. It's 3-question survey. Basically, it asks, you know, what everybody's priorities are, 1 through 5 for each of the 3 classifications, so local, regional, and interregional. So if we want to take that maybe as a starting point for establishing what might be our top priorities for the TAC, and then we can use the results of that to have a discussion. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Right.
Yeah, so I can start the poll. Oh, maybe I can't.
Oh, David, while you're looking at that, do we want to discuss a lot of those recommendations on the sea level rise projects? The question of is, I guess it's political, whether to put them on the list, knowing that they'll probably get pushed. We know that not everything on the 10-year list gets done in 10 years. And whether to get them on there, or if you think that the gas it, and I don't know how many of the governor's council people are on that, but whether they're going to knock off everything that's climate change oriented.
You know, Councillor Stevens has been supportive of addressing these needs. So at least, I don't know the political, whether they'll, whether the gas hit will sort of fall in along those lines or not. But Councillor Stevens, at least for our region, has been supportive of the STCDA project end of addressing climate change and resilience issues on the coast. So I think we have at least that support of our own counselor.
Right.
Whether we have the support of enough of them, yeah, that's a great question. You know,
But I think how I would do the poll as to whether all these things that you suggested that aren't going to be an issue for 20 to 25 years should be knocked down a lot, or whether there should be an effort to get these projects. I mean, obviously, some of them are pretty minor, but whether to get some of them onto the 10-year plan, in the hopes that the 25 years from now they won't be we won't all of a sudden be popping up as, oh, this has to be done now, and we can put it on the 10-year plan.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think some of those locations that are impacted at the higher levels, I think we do have time to kind of wait a little bit. My goal is that DOT is currently working on a similar analysis to the STCDA in terms of they're trying to come up with a framework for how to deal with coastal, both sea level rise, long-term impacts, as well as sort of the day-to-day maintenance on roads that may be seeing more water on them in the future.
Right.
And I'm hoping that out of that, we can, and DOT seems to be very invested in this, that we might be able to get another grant between DOT and RPC to do sort of more detailed analysis than what we did in the STCDA, and sort of do some of the engineering work, similar to what Hampton has done with their Meadow Pond and the Hampton Harbor flooding analysis, where they went in and said, here are some options for addressing these. Here's what we think maybe the costs, and here's what might work, what might not work. We kind of need to do that along the whole coast. But I think even if we don't fund any of them today or put them forward to get the scope and cost estimates, it's important that we continue to keep talking about them, because they will eventually become an issue. But the timelines are, some of them are out there. So I think we could wait a little bit, even if we want. I will say my poll does not seem to be working. It just gave me an error and said, nope. So we'll have to do this the old fashioned way. The scoring is the first step in terms of setting priorities, but again, we can sort of pick and choose from each of those. And so maybe what we ought to do is just start with local category and look at those 5 projects, or those, I guess there's actually 7 projects in there, and choose which 2 we think should move forward, and then go to the regional and do the same, and the interregional do the same, and then close it out with figuring out a couple or 3 more projects that we might want to consider, maybe a 3rd one from each one as the outside chance of getting those done. So I don't know where it's best to start. I could give you my thoughts on what I think, or happy to hear what other TAC members might have to say.
Go ahead, David.
All right.
We're chicken.
Yeah, I think we could probably eliminate some of these bottom ones, like the Stratum Circle and the Plastow one. I don't think it has local support, and I've got a lot of problems with that, since if you start putting improvements over onto North Road, you're basically making more traffic go that way. There's a good balance right now. People will only take that route if they think they're going to gain something over coming up 125. It would increase the traffic in that neighborhood, residential neighborhood. And I think that's why I don't think it has local support.
Yeah, you may be right. There's been some turnover in Plastow in terms of community leadership. So, I don't have a good feeling for that at this point in terms of whether there's support there or not. the two projects that I picked as seeing as maybe the most critical to move forward in the local category here were the Portsmouth Maplewood Avenue Culvert project and the Raymond Blueberry Hill Road and 102. As those were the ones that I felt were sort of the highest priority from my take on it. So those, you know, and that lines up pretty consistently with what you were saying, Peter, in terms of not doing Plastow or Stratum in these cases, just because those are maybe less supported or less defined projects at this point. And the Newcastle Rye project, you know, we have, again, that's one where we have time. And with one of the locations being studied already, it may make sense to see what the outcome of that study is before we push it forward for further funding. I see Chris Cross has his hand up.
Yes, David, just on the local category, a couple comments there. I kind of agree with you on the Portsmouth Maplewood Avenue from the standpoint of the extensive development that seems to be happening in downtown Portsmouth. It's just housing complex after office building, hotels. And I think establishing Maple Avenue as that secondary, tertiary access to that growing area down there might be something that's critical to do earlier rather than later. And then I was kind of looking for the second was the opposite down in Stratum, just a chance to convert that shopping center complex area into more walkable bike lanes by getting some sort of idea where the Route 108 crossing would be for pedestrians, and also get it off the road so pedestrians felt comfortable. And as Scott pointed out, getting some way to anticipate the turn-ins off Route 108 into whichever side of the road you're on, doesn't end up with pedestrians and bike people being clipped by being too close there. So that I was thinking in the local area, the first one in Portsmouth and the second one in Stratum.
David, to segue from Chris's point, can we put something in there for a study to do the cycle? If we can't get done, period, how about a study to an overview?
Well, I mean, we can put recommendations in for studies that need to be done, whether or not, you know, they're probably not going to add studies to the 10-year plan. But we can say that we think that certain areas need additional study and recommend that.
Well, you've got creative writing.
Yes.
Can I make a comment on behalf of Stratum?
So,
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I couldn't find the little hand raising thing. I did want to say that the gentleman earlier mentioned the Stratum Circle project, but that's not the one we're talking about. We're talking about the 108 pedestrian bicyclist access, and that is Mark did ask the planning board last Wednesday, and that is their highest priority project for the town, is the 108 project.
So the sidewalk improvements or pedestrian bike improvements. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
he had a number of projects that he presented to them, and he had them pick the top two, and the 108 was the top project.
Right, you're talking about between Market Basket and
Yep.
yeah,
Okay.
Ocean Lots, whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that's a viable option as well. You know, I think, again, I think we need to define the project a little better and more thoroughly if we're going to put it forward for a cost estimate development. That's my only hesitation on it, is that we would need to do that little extra step. And, you know, I think that is also an area that is eligible for the Transportation Alternatives Program, and CMAQ is probably eligible. If we get a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, that would certainly be eligible in that area as well too. So there's a lot of options for that location too. So
Should we move on to regional?
well, I think we need to come up with We've got a couple of different things that have been put forward as projects for the local.
I thought we just did.
Well, we've got
We'll get
Maplewood
three.
Avenue, Portsmouth, Raymond, Blueberry Hill, and Stratum were
Right.
3. So maybe what we should, would it make sense to sort of move the discussion along to keep them in sort of the rank order
Sure.
and do Portsmouth and Raymond as the top 2 and Stratum as a 3rd? And assuming that we can, if we can get more projects looked at, we'll get more looked at. Would that make sense to TAC members as a starting point?
Yeah, I'd certainly echo Chris's comments about Maplewood Ave. It's a major route into the downtown. It sees a lot of traffic, and that's increasing. And it's there's truck restrictions on that culvert right now, so it's definitely a major priority for us.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not hearing any objections to that. So why don't we put that as moving forward? We'll go with that, and then we'll get the regional ones and the interregional, and then I'll circle back and say, here's the slate of projects that we're going to put forward for investment or investment in scope and cost estimates, and then we'll have a vote on that.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir.
All right. So moving on to the regional projects. So we have Hampton High Street, Hampton Ocean Boulevard, Stratum Circle, Rye Harbor on Route 1A area, and Ashworth Avenue in Hampton. I can give you my opinions again, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
As
It
a
helped us last time.
So my thought was that on this one, the High Street project is one I think that makes sense to put forward, and at least getting the discussion started there, given the fact that it's impacted at a really low level of sea level rise. So that was the #1 ranked project. And the other one that I thought we should push forward was the Stratum Circle project. So those are my top 2. Third one would be the Ashworth Avenue in Hampton as a 3rd one, just because I know that's not part of the 40797 Hampton Ocean Boulevard project. And that project will certainly influence maybe what's needed there. But I think the timeframes would be different enough potentially that you could take what comes out of 40797 and build off it in the Ashworth Avenue project. So those are my thoughts on those 3.
Do the traffic counts make any difference on all of these roads or just ones that you had mentioned earlier?
I mean, traffic counts do play into the scoring. So those roads that have higher traffic volumes tend to score slightly higher on that on that category.
I noticed, David, you spoke up about the macadam or the pavement, how it looked and how it.
Yeah, so and that's based on the, sorry, I've got somebody's like power washing outside my window here. So I don't know if you can hear that. We look at the pavement analysis that DOT does, where they drive all the state highways every other year.
Yeah.
And they collect that data, and so we get information on pavement condition, and it's calculated based on roughness and condition and cracking and all those different pieces. And they come up with a composite score that boils down to good, fair, poor, or very poor. And so we are fortunate in this area that we have very little pavement that's in very poor condition. And so most of our pavement is in relatively good to fair condition. So that's that gets considered as part of this as well.
Okay.
Again, starting point from my perspective are the High Street, Stratum Circle, and Ashworth Avenue as sort of the 3 that I felt were probably the most critical of these 3 to try to move forward, or these 5 to move forward. But
No argument here, David. No argument here. Anybody else?
Just a question on, say, the 27 High Street project. Would this be one of the ones that gets moved forward to the engineers for costing?
Yes.
So I think it's important, I don't know, scope wise. I mean, the town right now is redoing all of High Street from utilities and improvements and pavement up to the intersection of Route 1. This
Okay.
project is specific to the sea level rise impact, and that's at the lower end of High Street at the intersection of Route at Ocean Boulevard, basically. So I just, if it's getting moved forward, I want to make sure that they understand that it's not all of High Street, it's the sea level impact part.
Right. Yeah. It's really just,
that gets, you know, defined.
yeah, it's really that last little section of, and I can't remember.
From Meadow Pond, it's Meadow Pond Lane out to the Boulevard.
Yep, that's it. So it's a very short section.
Okay.
All right. Okay. And then finally, in the interregional projects, my thoughts on this were, man, this one was a harder one to sort of make a call on. From a functionality perspective, the Portsmouth Circle is clearly the one that's having the most functional issues currently, and has for, you know, my entire time in this area. And so I think that's kind of one to move forward. The other ones are, you know, it's interesting. I think the 101 area in Hampton Beach, that is going to be really important. I just don't think that's a transportation project. Like, I don't think we can solve it with a transportation project. I think transportation has to be part of the discussion, but it has to be something like berms or seawalls around that whole area. And so, while I think we need to maybe highlight this in what we talk about to DOT, I don't think it's one that we should push forward as a transportation project at this point. That being said, the other three projects are all ones that I think are more solvable as transportation projects. So the Portsmouth Route 1, the Seabrook 286, and the Hampton Falls Route 1 are all kind of very similar projects in what they would end up being. I think the impacts are probably going to hit first on Route 1 in between Hampton and Hampton Falls. That seems to be the area that's most likely to get impacted first. And so it's that one, I would say, would be my second choice. And then, third choice is kind of a toss up at this point between Route 1 in Portsmouth and Seabrook and Route 286. I would have to say, yeah, that's a good question as to how that one. And I would say maybe, the Route 1 project in Portsmouth, there's a lot of traffic there that would have to be rerouted. There's so that's pretty big impacts. It might be a simpler solution, and then it would basically be a larger bridge than what's there now. Whereas 286 in Seabrook, I'm not quite sure what the solution is there. So, that one's maybe a more complicated project.
25 to 30 years to think about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in all likelihood, any one of these projects is going to be bigger than our allocation, just because these interregional projects, they're big projects and they tend to be expensive. So, that's a concern. But I would say, top two in this would be the Route 1 bypass functional improvements and that Hampton Falls area of Route 1, addressing something there for the long term. And third, I would waffle between the Route 1 in Portsmouth and the Seabrook 286 one. So, I see a couple hands raised. I think Peter, your hand was up first.
Yeah, I concur exactly with what you say. I think that the Hampton Falls project for Route 1 it's a bit deceptive when because in your disadvantages you talk about the 20 to 25 years, but it's Route 1 and it floods frequently during king tides, and it has a much higher impact than just the 25 years
Thank you, Peter.
future. I'm thinking that should be, as you already have, moved that up to number 2 because of the ongoing issue and the fact that Route 1 is a major artery. So and I think that the Portsmouth traffic circle is a no-brainer. I think that's got to be addressed. It's been on there too long, and
that's quite a few vehicles as well.
that's a lot. Yeah, that's a big impact.
It
So
used to be
I think
21.
both of those, as Dave points out, are big ticket items, and I think we only need 2. And even then, it's likely that the Route 1 at Hampton Falls is going to get dropped off because that's going to the project cost on that's going to eat up.
Did you hear Peter, David?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think that's you know, good points all the way across. I think, you know, like I said, any one of these 5 projects is probably bigger than our allocation, but you know, it doesn't mean they're not priorities. It just we'll have to pick and choose when we get to that point. Chris, you had your hand up as well.
Just very quick, similar to what Peter said. I think these are all so expensive that maybe we just pick 1 or 2 at the most, not go with the third. That's all it's.
So we would get, if we did 3 for the other 2 categories and 2 for this one, that would give us our 8. So I don't know, that seems reasonable to folks.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, so we are at 11 o'clock. Thanks for the thumbs up, Peter, I see that. You know, we need to wrap things up here, but maybe what I'll put forward so this is my understanding of our project priorities, okay? Starting with the local category, we're gonna do Portsmouth Maplewood Ave and Raymond 102/Blueberry Hill. And the third project that we'll put forward, if we can fund more than 6, say, is Stratum, Route 30, the 108 sidewalk improvements, okay? On the regional category, we're going to put forward Hampton High Street and the Stratum Circle. And if we can fund a third one, we'll do Ashworth Avenue in Hampton. And then for the interregional projects, we'll do Portsmouth, Route 1, the Portsmouth Traffic Circle as the top project. And second project would be Route 1 through Hampton and Hampton Falls, the Hampton Super Estuary. So those would be our 8 projects. I'll take the top 2 from each category as the first 6. And then the third project in the region, local and regional categories as number 7 and 8.
Can I ask another question again on behalf of Stratum? So I'm hearing you're putting the Stratum Circle on as a definite, but the 108 project as a possibility. Is there any way we could have one less project in the other category and make sure the 108 project that the town prefers?
I mean, that is.
Wait, here, Mark's here. Let me pull this out. You hear what I'm saying? Did you hear what I said?
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, the TAC, we have the opportunity at the TAC to sort of organize this however we want. If you wanted to pick, if the TAC decided that 3 from the local category is more important than having 3 certain ones from the regional category, then that's you know, that's fine. That's something that we can do, but it's got to be a decision of the committee. And so what we're doing with these is we're going to put this list of projects will go to our consultants to get estimates developed, right? And I'm guessing that we will be able to fund 6 to 8 estimates to be developed. And so basically that's what would, you know, so if we can only fund 6, we would at this point, based on our discussion so far, we would take the top 2 from each category. If we can fund more than 6, then we would take those other 2 projects. So that would be Stratum Circle or the Stratum like
108.
pedestrian projects on 108, and Ashworth Avenue in Hampton would be projects 7 and 8, basically. So, so that is an option. Rad, I see that you have your hand up.
Dave, I think if I'm remembering this correctly, part of the strategy for the 108 project, though, could be alternative funding sources through CMAQ or the alternatives program. So there are ways that could get funded outside of our traditional, federal highway funding.
Correct. Yeah, that is, I would say that area and that type of project would be eligible for TAP and CMAQ.
Yeah.
I am unclear as to when the next rounds of those will be. That would be one reason to push forward would be, I don't know when DOT is going to do another round of TAP or CMAQ. They've talked about doing like alternating with the 10-year plan cycles. So they one 10-year plan cycle, they'll do TAP, then other one they'll do CMAQ. So it's like a 4-year break in between cycles, which I don't think is the best idea necessarily, but that's what they've put forward. I'm just trying to weigh the pros and cons here of each. And I guess the other thing is, I don't know how much estimates are going to cost us at this point. So there is some possibility that it's less than 6 that we can do.
Yeah.
That is.
And would it be that the interregional projects, the bigger ones, would cost more for the estimate? Maybe would it be an option just to take one of those and to give us a possibility of getting 3 in the other categories?
Yeah, we could do that. And those probably will cost more. I guess one advantage is there's a full-blown engineering study done for the Route 1 bypass. So they do have like that study that the engineers could work from. So it might be easier to develop an estimate for that project. The Route 1 project in Hampton and Hampton Falls, that's I don't know if that would be more challenging. It's a pretty there's just a couple options that you could do there: raise the road or bridge it. And so those are pretty straightforward to estimate, I think. But so that's a good point, though. We can do it that way. We have the opportunities to do kind of however we see fit at this point. So,
David, hold on one second, David. Susan,
Yeah.
is the big man satisfied with your decision?
I think he has a question.
I would just say, when we talked about the planning board, I will say I sort of dissuaded the planning board from the Stratum Circle project a little bit, just because I can't remember if it was you, Dave, or Scott, but someone had told me that the budget is so high for that project that it takes up most of the RPC funds that they have in a year, so that you would have a lower chance of kind of getting through. And so I will say they did vote to prioritize the Portsmouth Avenue pedestrian light improvements. But I think part of that was because I dissuaded them a little bit from Stratum Circle based on the cost. And also, I do think the town did like a big conceptual study of it about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I think there's a feeling that it's on the right track, but they might want to revisit that a little bit because it's been so long since we left.
So as it stands right now, you're saying that the 108 is a go.
108. 108 over the Stratum Circle.
That was the vote of the planning board, yes.
Okay, Dave, you got that?
Yep. I mean, I have that. I'm happy to do whatever
It helps our
makes
cause.
sense. So, so we can. I mean, the proposal is out there. I guess, Chris, you have your hand raised still. Let's get that comment before I open my mouth again.
Just very quickly, I was just concurring with Susan and the Stratum team's decision to back that. But as Scott pointed out, there ought to be the 108 project needs some definition on just how that should be priced and proposed, rather than just a full alternative. So somehow in the interim to come up in the next month before it goes forward to actually figure out what kind of proposal is workable there needs to be done. That's all.
Yeah, so Mark and Susan, you have some work if assuming it goes forward. So, and we need just to have some discussions about what exactly is being proposed. Okay, so the proposal that's out there then, I guess, is to do so as our sort of 6 top projects would then be under this scenario would be Maplewood Avenue in Portsmouth, Blueberry Hill in Raymond, Stratum 108 bike pedestrian improvements, Hampton High Street, and then potentially Portsmouth Route 1 bypass traffic circle, Hampton Falls as the second one in that category, and then on the out chance that we could get additional funding, we would push for Hampton Ashworth Avenue and Stratum Circle as sort of 7 and 8. So basically, we would swap the circle and the 108 projects in terms of priority for doing estimates.
How does everybody feel about those?
That I'm seeing nodding heads. I'm not seeing anybody shouting no. Okay, so
You want to take a roll call, David?
yes.
Do we need a motion first? I'll move that we,
Yes.
the proposed, as David just read them.
Okay. All right.
So we have something to vote on.
All right. So we have a motion. Do we have a second on that?
Hello, second. Anybody?
I'll second that.
All
All
right,
right. So Eric, second.
thank you, sir.
Okay. So let me read that again, just to make sure that we are all on the same page as to what is being proposed. So we're going to put forward. So I'm going to just read the top 6 projects and then 7 and 8. So top 6, these will be the 6 that we try to get funded or try to get estimates for will be Portsmouth Maplewood Avenue, Raymond 102 and Blueberry Hill, Stratum Route 108 pedestrian improvements, bike and pedestrian improvements, High Street in Hampton, and the page is all mixed up, and then it would be the Route 1 bypass traffic circle in Portsmouth, and 6 would be the Hampton Falls section of Route 1 through the Hampton Seabrook Estuary, and then projects 7 and 8 would be Ashworth Avenue in Hampton, and then the traffic circle in Stratum. So we can do 8, we'll get 8 done. We can do 6. Those last 2 that I mentioned will get completed. For again, this is for scope and cost estimates. All right.
Okay. Roll call.
Okay. We lost Jen and Ricky to other appointments. So
They were yeses.
yeah. So yes. So okay. So roll call vote. Eric Eby.
Aye, yes.
Yes. Mark Connors or Susan, whichever one of you is still around.
He walked to his other meeting, so yes.
All right. Peter Coffin.
Yes.
Chris Cross.
Yes.
Brad Nichols.
Yeah.
All right. Richard McDermott.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's everybody. So, all right, that's excellent. Thank you. On that, I will start packaging that, and I will be reaching out, Susan, to you and Mark to try to get some better, more concrete scope that we can send to the consultants. Okay.
One last question to everybody. Does anybody have any questions about July 28 project updates. Because we're past our time. I didn't want to hold
Yes,
anybody
we're all
up.
past our time. I have a memo. I will send that out to everybody after the meeting. I appreciate everybody sticking around for the extra time. I did not expect it would take this long, but
Job well done.
it's one of those things. So,
No meeting, no meeting in August.
yeah,
Next meeting September.
I think likely we will cancel the August meeting.
Okay.
It's still on the calendar at this point, but I'll send a notice out ahead of that if either way, if we're going to meet. But at this point, I don't have anything for an agenda in August.
All right, September 22nd is the next one.
All right,
I don't hear anything.
you can just adjourn the meeting.
Currently
It's
being,
adjourned. Nobody answered, nobody spoke up.
no, we don't want to take a roll call vote, just adjourn.
I'm not keeping you here. Go
Okay.
home.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.